Simmens has been involved as senior level positions in government and public policy for over 36 years, serving in 2 presidential administrations under 4 cabinet secretaries, as well as serving 2 U.S. senators, 2 governors, and serving as assistant executive director of the United States Conference of Mayors, representing the nation's largest cities. Among his many achievements, he was tapped into helping to establish the first federal Office of Sustainable Development during the Clinton administration, led renewable energy efforts in Pennsylvania under Governor Ed Rendell, as one of the first individuals trained by former Vice President Al Gore to deliver climate change presentations, and has worked with Gasland Director Josh Fox to expose the dangers of fracking. He has published over 300 articles, delivered more than 100 lectures and presentations on climate change, and has recently been an adjunct professor of public policy at Santa Monica College. With that introduction, I've used up 5 minutes of your time.
Actually, that was my presentation. Thank you very much. All right, good morning, everyone. The title of my talk. You can't hear me back there? Okay. The title of my presentation was "Don't Be Pennsylvania." For 8 years, I served Governor Ed Rendell in, I really don't think I need this, but, all right. For 8 years, I served as senior advisor to Governor Ed Rendell in Pennsylvania, and during that time, literally, we saw a fracking explosion in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was ground zero for fracking for basically most of the last decade. It is very unusual in life when you get an opportunity to see the future. I have seen the future. I'm not going to regale you with horror stories, but they exist. And many, many questions are unanswered. And before you proceed here, please take advantage of the opportunities that you have to see what has happened elsewhere, and make sure that as you proceed with caution. Now, we are at a college here, so I am going to rely. This is an intergenerational presentation that I'm putting together here, and I'm going to rely on the college folks right over here to help me explain this. That's the title of my presentation, actually. Who can tell me what that says? Oh, come on, come on. See if you can see why we are fracked. All right, that's the title. All right.
Are you sure you meant the last word there?
As you can see, there are 2 symbols. All right. Okay. Okay. See if you can see why we are fracked. All right. 118 billion. What, does anybody know what that stands for? What that means? A lot of money, right? It is the amount of profit that the big 5 oil companies, oil and gas companies, made last year. $118 billion in profit. Okay? 10 to $52 billion. These are the range of estimates from low to high on what the federal government subsidizes the oil and gas industry on a yearly basis. A figure that you do not see up there, and I'll be conservative here. I'll take the lower number. Okay? There's a piece of legislation stalled in Congress, of course, offered by Bernie Sanders from Vermont called the End Polluter Welfare Act. And he wants to essentially end oil and gas subsidies over the next 10 years. That would bring in $110 billion. What can we do with $110 billion in the energy sector? What do you think? Probably could use it, huh? All right. And now, I'm going to sit down. $120 billion. This is in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences estimated that this was the yearly cost in health-related costs due to fossil fuels. All right. ExxonMobil is number one. What do you think they're number one in? Profits. They're the most profitable corporation in the history of mankind. They were number one in profits last year. And look who was number two. Chevron. And number 13, trailing behind, was ConocoPhillips. Okay, you get the picture here? 15,200. This represents the number of jobs that were shed in the fossil fuel industry between 2006 and 2011. But wait a minute, Lance. You just showed all those profits. How can they be shedding jobs? 13%, 19%, and 18%. What do you think this is? Well, 13% is the effective tax rate that ExxonMobil paid last year. How many in this room paid an effective tax rate of 13%? Not going to the students. How many people paid an effective tax rate of 13% last year? I don't see one hand being raised. 19% was the effective tax rate that Chevron paid last year, and 18% is the effective rate that ConocoPhillips paid last year. All right, get the picture? $446 billion, almost $500 billion. These are the amount of oil and gas industry subsidies from 1918 to 2009. $5.5 billion. That doesn't look quite as big as close to $500 billion, does it? That's the amount of subsidies that renewable energy got from 1994 to 2009. 80-1. U.S. taxpayers have effectively invested $80 in oil for every $1 invested in clean, renewable energy. You think it's time to level the playing field, maybe? Yeah. That's it? Only a couple, yeah? Oh, yeah! You think? Okay. All right. $3.66. What could that be? Gas prices. That's the average gas price in 2012. It's the highest amount, the highest average ever in history. Okay. Precautionary principle. Anybody know what this is? Yeah. Basically what it is it says, do no harm. Proceed cautiously. Right? Don't rush headlong into things before you know the answers. Like, for instance, I'm sure most of you were admonished when you were just wee tykes to figure out how deep the pool is before you jump in head first. Because if it's 6 inches, that will probably be very different than 6 feet. It'd be good to know, don't you think? Yeah, of course it would. Ask the right questions. Folks, distraction, anyone ever read The Art of War? Yeah. Distraction is a time-tested and valuable tactic in warfare. When people ask the question, should we wean ourselves off of foreign oil? The answer, of course, is yes. Of course we should. But that's not the right question. The right question is, should we wean ourselves off of fossil fuels? Yes. So make sure that you don't get distracted by the wrong questions. We're talking about, and other people will go into depth on this, we're talking about water contamination, we're talking about water quality and quantity. I'm a Californian now. I saw Chinatown. Unless things have changed dramatically, water seems to be a pretty big issue here. We're talking about massive quantity of water and the potential for a massive contamination of watersheds in Pennsylvania and in New York, where New York is struggling mightily with this issue of fracking. We have fought valiantly to prevent fracking in the watershed, which feeds New York City, Philadelphia, and Wilmington, Delaware. 16 million people could potentially be affected by these kinds of levels of contamination. We're talking about air quality. I have visited a home in southwestern Pennsylvania where the young couple with young kids, on 10 acres, their dream house, have a windsock in the backyard. This is not Chernobyl. That windsock is to tell the kids whether or not they can play outside that day. It's here, folks. I've seen it. Public health. We've already seen what the cost consequences to public health are. We're talking about very dangerous, toxic materials being injected beneath the ground. Some of it comes back, some of it doesn't. Where does it go? Where does it migrate? What's it do? I have visited the homes on Carter Road in Dimmock, Pennsylvania, where 14 homes had their water supplies, their water wells, contaminated beyond retrievability. You got earthquakes out here. You got fault lines.
5 minutes.
We need to seriously answer questions on what the potential causality or impact or cause and effect relationship are with injecting at such incredible pressures as deep as you can with this new technology of hydraulic fracturing, with these toxic chemicals, what the relationship is with regard to existing fault lines. And climate change. Oh yes, climate change. Remember that? Remember global warming? Well, it's still with us, folks. And the extent to which continued reliance, a continued dependence on fossil fuels, and the one thing we know, there are a lot of things we don't know, but there are a lot of things we do know. And certain things that we do know are the following. We know that fossil fuels come from under the ground. Okay? We know that these fuels from hell, as Tom Friedman calls them, they will go away. We know that burning them emits greenhouse gases. We know these things. These are not things that we argue over. And we know that climate change is accelerating in an exponential way. So before we try to tap every last ounce of fossil fuel from Mother Earth, we've got to pay attention to the long-term and the short-term aspects of this problem. 1916. Is that a very good year? Anybody here from that year? 1916 was the year that Congress passed oil expensing provisions in the tax code, which basically allow oil companies and gas companies to take immediate tax advantages rather than spreading out advantages over the lifetime of the well. This still exists. Do you think we need to help this nascent little industry? Do you think we need to help them grab a foothold in the world economy almost 100 years later? Folks, and there are a lot of you, and I can see this audience, who will probably get this. This is a time for us to just say no. But we can do it diplomatically. We can just say no, thank you. My good friend Tony Ingraffia, who's an engineering professor at Cornell and has written extensively on fracking, he and I participated in a conference at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, and we had dinner together. I was working for the governor at the time in Pennsylvania, and I went through a whole list of things with him over dinner, and he said, "Damn you," and I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "I'm going to have to go back to the hotel tonight and rewrite my entire presentation for tomorrow." Well, he did. And the next day, he gave what I consider to be one of the most profound presentations on fracking that I've heard. And in it, he essentially raises a lot of questions which don't have answers. And it's particularly aimed at this idea that if we just regulate, we can regulate our way to a safe use of this technology. And at the end of his letter, and it was done in wonderful, at the end of his letter, he said, "Speaking on behalf of the community, I've come to the conclusion that doing the right thing is wrong." So as we work our way through this world of how to deal with this issue, there's going to be a lot of conversation.
Time.
There's going to be a lot, well, we got a few questions and answers too. So there's going to be a lot of conversation about regulations and whether you can have effective, safe regulations. Got to ask the right questions, got to get the right answers, then you got to make a decision. To the extent that you can play a major role in helping make that decision. This, folks, is going to come from the bottom up. It's going to come from the grassroots up. This is not going to come from the top down. Because of every number that I have put up there, this is not going to come from the top down. We had a minor victory. Well, I guess all victories are major at this point. We had a major victory this past week in that 2 bills were introduced to place a moratorium on fracking here in California. One by State Assemblyman Bloom and one by Assemblyperson Holly Mitchell. Okay? She's your very own. There are tables outside. Avail yourselves of the opportunity to sign petitions, both to the State Democratic Party and to the governor, to, once again, stop this until you are satisfied. You, because you, and particularly you, all these youngsters, this is about you. This is not about me. This is not about a lot of people in here, because we're going to be gone. You're going to have to deal with this. You are going to be left holding the bag. You have the responsibility to hold us being my generation, and your elected officials collectively, you have the solemn responsibility of self-interest and nothing else to make sure that we leave this place in at least as good a shape as we found it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We'll have,